Hi guys, want to do a sort of brief video. This is about GDPR, General Data Protection Regulations, that came into effect of July 2018. It was a European Union directive, which meant basically the holder of any of your personal data is responsible for that data, and if they share that data with a third party without your consent, you can claim compensation against them. So what I wanted to do is explain my experience of GDPR, because I kicked Tesco's in the Ghoulies over GDPR. So what I'll do is give you a brief explanation of what happened to me, and then I encourage you to look into GDPR for yourselves, and I'll give a brief overview of some videos I've seen where people have gone into council offices in the UK filming, and they're told about personal data and people's privacy, and it's not up to the photographer to keep that identification private. It's up to the holder of the identification, holder of the information, to keep that information private. Okay, right, my experience first and foremost. Right, I went to Tesco's to fill up my car with fuel. I put some fuel in my car, and it wasn't a lot of money. It was about 20 quid. I thought I'd just stick 20 quid's worth of squirt in the car just to make sure I could get to work the next day and home and back and forth and whatever. So it wasn't a lot of money. It was 20 quid. So I got out the car and I needed some cash. So I went to the cash point and went back to the car because I forgot my debit card, and then realised I'd left my debit card in my friend's van. So while we was at work, so I couldn't get the cash out, and I'd already put the petrol in the car. So I went to the cashier's desk and I explained what had happened. I said, I'm ever so sorry, I put £20 worth of squirt in the motor and I can't get any money out of the cash point because I've left my debit card in my friend's van. She said, don't worry, it happens all the time. All you got to do is write down your registration number, contact telephone number, and if you pay what you've owed in the next 7 days, then don't worry about it. I said, okay, cool. So anyway, that was fine. So I went back to work the next day, got my debit card. About 4 days later, I was driving past the same petrol station. So I popped in and I explained the situation again, said, look, I dropped in the other day. I didn't have my debit card with me. I put fuel in the car without knowing I didn't have my debit card. And I obviously drove away with the fuel. You know, I wrote my details down. So she goes, there's your details. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. And I said, okay, so there's my debit card. So I paid for the £20 worth of fuel. Now, I was given 7 days to pay, and I returned and paid within 4 days. So I don't know why, but I'm glad I did. But I kept the receipt for the payment that I made. Normally, I wouldn't keep a receipt for 20 quid's worth of fuel. So I kept the receipt. I stuffed it in one of my little compartments in the car and forgot about it. And this was end of August, beginning of September 2018. Now, I left it, forgot about it, thought that's all done and dusted. I got a letter, which my brother got, to his address, and he sent me a screenshot of the letter, and it was a letter from a debt collection agency charging me £52 for £20 worth of fuel. So I thought, well, I'm not contacting the debt collector, because as soon as you contact the debt collector and give them the reference number, you're contracting with them. Okay, so don't ever do that. Go back to the first person that's shared your information. So I phoned Tesco's and I said to them, I explained what had happened, blah, 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 this, that and the other. I went back within the 7 days, paid it. I've got the receipt, so I can prove that I paid for the fuel. when I didn't have my debit card. Now, Tesco's didn't really know what was going on, and I said to them, look, I'm not going to muck about. I haven't got time to muck about. I'd suggest that you escalate this to your next manager, and when you escalate it to your manager, mention the term GDPR regulations as of July 2018, right? He or she should know what GDPR is. If he or she is unaware of what the GDPR is, there is someone within your company who is GDPR compliant, which means they must understand the GDPR regulations. Okay? Now, you have shared my information with a third party without my consent, and that is a violation of GDPR regulations. So, whoever you speak to, make sure somebody calls me back and they're GDPR compliant. Okay? She said, I've never heard of it, but I'll take that on board. And I said, well, do take it on board because I know what I'm talking about. I left it at that. 2 days later, Tesco's phoned me back, and they were very and and oh yes, and yeah, we're aware of GDPR. And I said, look, I don't give a shit, right? At the end of the day, you have failed to comply with GDPR regulations, which you are supposed to. I paid my bill well within the 7-day time limit you gave me. I gave you all my information. I went back and paid the bill, so that's not a problem. So why have you shared my details with a third party without my consent? Somebody in Tesco's fucked up, basically. So that ended there, and I said, I don't care who you have to escalate this to, because obviously you don't know what you're talking about, so you must escalate it to somebody who's GDPR compliant and knows what GDPR is. Are you aware what GDPR is? The person on the phone said to me, no, I don't know what GDPR is. I said, well, you keep going up your chain of command until you find someone who's GDPR compliant. Anyway, I then got a phone call about 24 hours later from Tesco's apologising profusely about this, that and the other, and somebody obviously made a mistake and this, that and the other, and I said, I don't care. At no point did I ask for any compensation. So let's be aware of that, because if you had a similar situation in the UK under GDPR compliance, the minimum you could get is £1,500 in compensation from the company that shared your data with another company without your consent. Right. Fast forward, 2 days later, I got a phone call again saying they were ever so sorry, and finally some guy phoned up and actually knew what he was talking about with regards to GDPR compliance. He was again very apologetic, blah blah blah. You've done the right thing, you kept your receipt, and we shouldn't have shared your information with a third party, debt collection agency, etc., etc., etc. This was on the Friday morning. He then called. He said he would call me back within 24 hours, and I said that's fine. Again, I still haven't asked for any compensation whatsoever, and anyway, Saturday morning I was driving to work, and I stopped at a builder's merchant's to pick up some bits and pieces, and when I got back in the car, the phone rang, and I had my camera to hand, my body camera, and I tried to fire it up and it wouldn't go, but I knew who it was, so I had to answer the call. So I think I've still got the video, because I think I started the video about halfway through the conversation. Anyway, the guy from Tesco's phoned up again, apologised profusely for the breach of the GDPR regulations, and was very polite, very professional, and said to me, due to this GDPR, fault on our part, we will give you £250 compensation. Bearing in mind, I never asked for a penny in compensation from these people, but they knew how powerful GDPR was. Now, I could have said that's not acceptable, and I could have, really kicked them in the goolies for a big payout, but not a big payout. I think the maximum you can get for a GDPR complaint on the level that happened, as I've explained, is around £1,500. But that would mean that Tesco's would have to deny my claim, and then I would have to go to the Information Commissioner's office, make a complaint to the Information Commissioner's office, and they would take up my complaint and then go to Tesco's, and Tesco's would deal with the Information Commissioner's office with regards to the illegal sharing of my personal data. So that's that explained. You're welcome to look into it yourself, and if you come up with anything else. But I've seen some audits in the UK, specifically, I'm not sure who it was. It may well have, I don't want to say one auditor or another photographer or another, videographer, but one videographer went into a council building in London and started filming. And one of the receptionists said to them that he couldn't film because they had people's personal data on their computers. And this is where GDPR comes in, because it doesn't matter. You are the holder of that data. It's up to you, the council, to keep that data private. If you show or leave somebody's personal data, say I go into my local council office and give them a photocopy of my driving licence, and they leave it on a desk haphazardly, and somebody else can come in and see that document, whether they photograph it or not is irrelevant. If they can see that document, effectively the council has shared my personal data with a third party without my consent, and the council can be sued for it. And the minimum, I said, is the minimum for a single person application is around £1,500, right? Now, this was in the news, and it was stated that it's not just the fines. A fine for, say for argument's sake, Vodafone shared 50,000 people's personal data with a third party without their consent. Those 50,000 people will be entitled to compensation under GDPR regulations. Now, it's not the fines that could hurt these companies, even though they can be fined up to 4% of their worldwide turnover, right, which is a big old chunk of money. But after that, it's the compensation that they reckon that could drive these companies to the wall. Because if you've got 50,000 people making a class action, and you can do a class action lawsuit under the EU regulations if a company like Vodafone shared 50,000 people's personal data with a third party without the consent, those 50,000 people can then sue Vodafone for GDPR infringement. And it's not the fine that could cripple the company, it's the compensation payout. Okay, so that's where it lies. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments section below. If not, please do your own research. Don't leave it to me. Do your own research. GDPR regulations, July 2018 they came into effect, and that concerns the holder of your personal data and what they can and cannot do with it. They cannot share it with a third party without your consent, as I've already explained in my drama with Tesco's. So that's that. I just wanted to bring that aware, because it does come under the photography thing as well. So where it's creeping in a little bit is everybody's saying that you're liable if you take a photograph of somebody's personal information that's on a computer, on a piece of paper, or in a government office. No, that's not correct. It's they have to be compliant with GDPR regulations, because it's down to them to keep that person's private information private. It's not up to a photographer, a videographer, or anybody with a photographic memory to walk into a council and see that bit of paperwork and memorise that information and then take it away with them. It's the holder of the information that's liable to keep it secure. Okay, just so you know, any questions, leave them in the comments. If you want to do your own research, feel free, because that's what it's all about. Everyone shares information, and that's how we get shit done. Alright guys. Thanks for your time. Much appreciated. And thanks for your support. I'll speak to you all again soon. Take care.